Hey fools, it's John Rosevear. So General Motors this week kicked off a full-blown marketing push for its 2014 Chevrolet Malibu sedan. That may seem like an unusual move because the Malibu isn't an all-new model, and that's what usually gets the big marketing pushes. But this is an unusual situation. The last all-new Malibu was launched about a year and a half ago, early 2012, but it kind of fell flat in the marketplace. GM has had a string of strong new products, the new Cadillacs, the Chevy Impala, the new pickups, and so forth, but the Malibu wasn't really in that class. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't perceived as being super competitive with the class leaders, vehicles like the Toyota Camry, which was all new at about the same time, and it had a lot of the wind sucked out of its sails when Ford showed its all-new Fusion, right about the same time that the Malibu was starting to head to dealers. Ford, and of course the Fusion is a striking design, came with a compelling feature list, and the Malibu kind of looked not so good in comparison. So it's not so much that Malibu was awful, but it wasn't as competitive as GM had hoped. Strong new entries arrived, and the Malibu wasn't quite up to snuff. Critics complained about its bleh gas mileage, and it had a cramped back seat, and the styling was boring, the interior was kind of blah. And these were all things where like the Ford Fusion and the new Honda Accord and the Nissan Altima had the Malibu beat in just about everybody's eyes. And there were rumors that GM had rushed the car to market ahead of schedule, and it all kind of turned into this big mess. And long story short, the Malibu hasn't had the sales numbers that GM was wanted. The midsize sedan category is the biggest selling class of cars in the US. This is important. The Camry and the Honda Accord, best-selling cars in America. In fact, Ford ended up in the interesting situation with its Fusion where its factory was working around the clock and still couldn't keep up with demand. So Ford had to open a second assembly line at another factory. They did that at the end of August. Meanwhile, of course, your local Chevy dealer had plenty of Malibus in stock. But to the immense credit of current GM management, in the old days, the situation with the Malibu, this was how they did things for a long time. They just crank up the incentives and wait for the next model. Not this time. This time they're moving quickly to make improvements. Normally, an automaker like GM does a refresh of a new model 3 or 4 years after it's launched, and another all-new one a couple years later. With the Malibu, they moved that refresh way up. That's what's rolling out right now. That's why the big ad campaign. The 2014 Malibu is an improved product. They did a bunch of changes to it. They changed the interior in a bunch of ways to make it nicer. They added room in the back seat by redesigning the front seat backs and some other things. They added a stop-start system to the engine and some other advancements to the base 2.5-liter engine to get the fuel economy ratings up. It gets 25 in the city and 36 on the highway now. That's up from 22 in the city and 34 on the highway. They also changed the front end a little bit to make it look a little sharper. It's not a complete redo, but the changes do sort of take it up the scale somewhat, and it should be enough to make it more competitive. And if they can get some decent reviews, it could start to do better once they put some marketing muscle behind it, and that's what's starting now. Of course, if it doesn't, then GM will have to resort to discounts, and GM shareholders don't want to see that. We want to see margins and profits come up, and the bigger discounts, that's the old way of doing things, and it won't do good for GM. So we're hoping this takes off if we're GM shareholders. Thanks for listening, and voila.